This morning, I want to talk about lost things. Don't you hate when you lose something? Gosh. About 2 weeks ago, my daughter lost her water bottle, the nice ones, the Hydro Flasks, And then this week, my son lost his keys on the walk home from school. And so we got back in the car and drove, and I'm doing 2 miles an hour on the side of the road while Jackson's rewalking, and we're looking, and we couldn't find him. And then Thursday night, I go to play softball, and I have, this tiny little key fob that I've put in my pocket of my shorts so that, I don't slide and tear up my leg. And then, of course, it falls out in the outfield. And so we have to get everyone and kind of look for it. Thankfully, I found that. We haven't found it. I was like, Jesus, no more sermon illustrations. I'm good. I got it. I have lost things on my mind. Everyone understands that anxiety of losing something, right? Maybe it's a piece of jewelry that you love, and you just had it. It was right. I just wore it the other day, or your wallet, and you're thinking, where did I put it or heaven forbid, your phone. I know I can track it, but what am I going to do in the interim before I get it? I mean, that anxiety, that kind of panic that sets in as you start checking the places where you think it's going to be, and it wasn't, and it's not there, and it's not there, and there's only a few places left. We all know that feeling. And the more irreplaceable the object, the more the stakes start to climb. Lost things matter to people. And I think Jesus is so aware of that in the human experience that he decides to leverage that experience of being someone who loses something that is of value. He decides to leverage that as a teacher in order to make a point about the heart of God. And so today we're going to see that yes, lost things matter to people, but never as much as lost people matter to God. And when I say lost people, I want to make sure I clarify that I don't mean that in some negative, pejorative way, right? I mean, we can use the word lost sometimes culturally in a slanderous way that kind of means rebellious or disobedient. I don't really mean that. Some of you may feel lost today in areas of your life, and I'm not trying to in any way evoke a sense of shame about that. Lost doesn't inherently mean foolish or rebellious. Lost just means that something is separated from its original owner or creator. A lost person is just someone who's separated from being in a right relationship with the God who created him or her. And so when we say lost, don't immediately go negative, just in the same way that a water bottle, a key, that we don't necessarily blame those things for being lost. It's the inherent condition of that object in the moment. And the inherent condition of humanity is that we can find ourselves lost at times. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's look at the text this morning. We're going to look at Luke chapter 15. And Jesus is going to offer a set of parables, and he's going to offer it in his public teaching to a context that contains two very different audiences. And this is very common in Jesus' teaching, that there are two different crowds in front of him that make up the masses. It says in verse 1 of Luke 15, "Now the tax collectors and sinners were all gathered around to hear Jesus. But the Pharisees and teachers of the law muttered, 'This man welcomes sinners and eats with them.'" Did you catch the two audiences there? On one hand are the tax collectors and sinners. They make up one group. But then on the other end of the social spectrum, and probably on the other end of the physical location as well, are the Pharisees and the scribes, or the teachers of the law. And they are offended that Jesus keeps welcoming these sinners and tax collectors into his community. And so there's a sense in which they want to hear what Jesus has to say, but they also don't want to get too close to this sinful crowd. There's a sense in which those people are morally contaminated. They're infected. They have this sin, shame virus. And if we get too close to them, maybe it'll rub off on us and our reputation. So we want to be in the crowd, but we definitely don't want to be near them. In fact, why does Jesus keep inviting them in? Shouldn't we be having a high-level theological, spiritual conversation with this rabbi? What do we need this rabble-rousing crowd, these derelicts? We don't need them around. And so if they are allowed, at least we're going to keep our distance. And Jesus sees this dynamic happening over and over and over again, the condemnation that is being expressed from the religious elite to the common person, and especially those who have a shameful reputation. And he decides to try to address it in this chapter. And he leverages this moment where both groups are present to offer three parables to challenge this cultural moment that he's facing. The first parable is known as the parable of the lost sheep. So Jesus told them this parable, saying, "What man among you, if he has 100 sheep and has lost one of them, does not leave the 99 in the open pasture and go after the one which is lost until he finds it? When he has found it, he lays it on his shoulders, rejoicing. And when he comes home, he calls together his friends and his neighbors, saying to them, 'Rejoice with me, for I have found my sheep which was lost.' I tell you that in the same way there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who need no repentance." Then he gives them a second parable known as the parable of the lost coin. Or, he says, "What woman, if she has 10 silver coins and loses one coin, does not light a lamp and sweep the house and search carefully until she finds it? When she has found it, she calls together her friends and neighbors, saying, 'Rejoice with me, for I have found the coin which I had lost.' In the same way, I tell you, there is joy in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents." Now let's pause for a second. Do you see the pattern that Jesus is establishing in these two stories? There's a protagonist who loses something important. A diligent search ensues. The valuable item is found, and then the community comes together to celebrate and rejoice. Same thing happens in both stories. But there's not just a pattern, there's also this interesting progression. See, in the first story, the lost object is an animal. It's basically a commodity, something that is owned, that has a sense of value because it could be exchanged for a currency. And there was one sheep lost out of 100. So basically, the value of that item is 1% of the owner's wealth. 1 out of 100. Now, in the second story, what's lost is not a commodity, it's actually currency. It's something of more value. It's a coin. And it's not 1 of 100, now it's 1 of 10. So it's not 1% of the total wealth, but now it's 10% of the total wealth. So not only do we have a pattern, but we have a progression. And so if Jesus is going to tell a third story, you'd imagine as a storyteller, he's setting us up now for the same pattern and maybe something to be of more value. And let's see, 1%, 10%. I'm not a math major, but I think that's factors of 10. So 1 to 10, the next would be 100% of the wealth. So let's see if that's what we get when we get to the third story. Or let's see if Jesus actually takes that anticipation and decides to twist it to make his point. The final story, Jesus said, "A man had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, 'Father, give me the share of the estate that falls to me.' So the father divided his wealth between them. And not many days later, the younger son gathered everything together and went on a journey into a distant country, and there he squandered his estate with loose living. Now when he had spent everything, a severe famine occurred in that country, and he began to be impoverished. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, and he sent him into the fields to feed swine. And he would have gladly filled his stomach with the pods that the swine were eating, for no one was giving him anything to eat. But when he came to his senses, he said, 'How many of my father's hired men have more than enough bread, but I am dying here with hunger? I will get up, I will go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight, and I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me as one of your hired men.' So he got up and came to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and felt compassion for him and ran and embraced him and kissed him. And the son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven, and in your sight I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his slaves, 'Quickly, bring out the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his hand and sandals on his feet, and bring the fatted calf. Kill it, and let's eat and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and has come to life again. He was lost, and he has been found.' And they began to celebrate." If you've ever read Henry Nouwen's incredible book, The Return of the Prodigal Son, where he actually kind of breaks down the famous Rembrandt painting on this, he adds all these incredible cultural details from the ancient Near East that are so easy for us to miss right, in a non-agrarian society that we currently live in, right? He mentions things, for instance, about the way inheritance worked back then. That, the inheritance that the young boy is asking for is actually, of course, inheritance that he would never be able to receive until the father died, and that the father's primary possessions were the land and the animals and the things that he had. It wasn't like a 401k, right? And he's like, hey, can I just get my percentage of the 401k? So what the father probably had to do is to go find someone who would basically give him a cash loan against his possessions, cash out, so that he could go give his son the inheritance to leave. And in that process of going to some wealthy person and asking for a loan, you can imagine the disgrace of articulating, my son would rather have the inheritance than be in a relationship with me. Basically what he's saying is, Dad, you're worth more to me dead than alive. So can I just get that money now and I'll be on my way? In an honor-shame culture, it's an incredibly disgraceful, shameful thing that he does to his dad. And then how on top of that, there's this Jewish description of rock bottom. Did you catch it? What does rock bottom look like in a kosher culture? It looks like hanging out with pigs, wanting to eat what pigs eat. Like that's as low as it gets. I mean, the entire community of people listening would go, ugh, that's disgusting. And that's exactly what Jesus is going for. This kid had hit rock bottom. And then my favorite detail is about the actions of the father and how lavish his love is. I never would have known this, but in the ancient Near East, it was actually dishonorable or disgraceful for a grown man to run in public. Right? This is long before the running craze. Men didn't run. You're not in a hurry to get anywhere, right? You composed yourself. So the idea that this man kind of hikes up the clothing that he wears and runs in front of all of his servants and brings shame upon himself is showing how passionate he is about restoring his son. It's an incredible image of grace. And then when he gets to his son and embraces him, and I love how he just totally dismisses the son's rehearsed speech. He's like, yeah, be quiet. He immediately covers him in his robe. It's like taking him back into the covering of his house almost. It's like you're back part of the family. And then he gives him a ring. And so back in that culture, that would have been a signet ring. It would have been a ring the father wore that had an impression on it, that's how he would have signed documents. You've seen the wax stuff. He's basically saying, here's a copy of Dad's credit card in case you have any expenses. You're back in the family. And then not only that, but now we're going to do something that we rarely ever do, which is eat meat for dinner. Because meat is incredibly valuable. So we're going to kill that fatted calf, that fatted animal that we've been waiting on for the big celebration. We're going to do that tonight in honor of you being back. And then not only that, but I'm going to signify to the whole community, my servants, my friends, your brother, that you and I are back in equal relationship by sharing a meal at one table together. In the ancient Near East, table fellowship was the highest form of social equality. And so for him to say, my son is back at my table and we're touching the same food and sharing the same meal was a way of saying, my boy is home and he's back in the family again. It's an incredible picture of lavish grace. But here's the thing about the third story. It didn't follow the pattern. And it didn't follow the progression. You remember the pattern was something is lost. Someone goes out to find it. They rejoice and they call the community together, right? What's missing? There was no search. I mean, in the parable of the lost sheep, the one sheep didn't wander back home. It wasn't like, oh my gosh, I didn't even know you were missing. We're so glad you're back, all right? Kristen and I, one time back when we were pastoring in Virginia, left our kid behind. PKs, this happens a lot. There's two adults in the room. You all are very responsible. You look after children. One person gets in one car, the other person gets in another car. My phone rings. Hey, Addie's still at church, and no one's here for her. I was like, we'll come get her, thanks. But there was no search. I had to be notified that I had lost a child. The coin doesn't come rolling out from under the bed, and there it is. Oh my gosh, found it. No, see, the protagonist had to go searching, but there's no search. Why did we skip that part of the pattern? And then our theory of the progression was that we would go in factors of 10. We'd go from 1% to 10% to 100%. But wait a minute, only one son is lost. That's 50%. What gives? Well, as you, I'm sure, know, there's more to the parable, and this is where Jesus gets so good. He continued, "Now his older son was in the field, and when he came and approached the house, he heard music and dancing. And he summoned one of the servants and began inquiring what these things could be. And the servant said to him, 'Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fatted calf because he's received him back safe and sound.' But the older brother became angry and was not willing to go in. And his father came out and began pleading with him. But he answered and said to his father, 'Look.'" First, I don't know about you, but I didn't talk to my dad a lot like that. "Look," finger in the face, "look, for so many years I've been serving you, and I've never neglected a command of yours. And yet you've never given me a young goat so that I might celebrate with my friends. You never even ordered pizza for me on a Friday night with my friends. You don't spend any money on me. But when this son of yours came, who has devoured your wealth with prostitutes, you killed the fatted calf for him?' And the father said, 'Son, you have always been with me, and all that is mine is yours. But we had to celebrate and rejoice, for this brother of yours was dead and has begun to live. He was lost, and he has been found.'" Man, what a depiction of the older brother, huh? I mean, showing this sense of self-righteousness and entitlement. You notice that, you notice how he refers to his brother? "This son of yours." Not my brother anymore. He cashed out on this family. I'm not related to that punk. Do you notice that he kind of slanders his brother's character? I mean, he hasn't seen his brother, hasn't talked to his brother. They're not texting. He has no idea what his brother is doing, but he's assumed that he's been wasting his money on prostitutes. Now, I'm not a therapist, but you might say maybe he's projecting some of his own fantasies onto what his brother was doing off on that foreign country, but we don't have the time to explore that today. And like I said, I'm not a licensed therapist. But the other thing he does, again, is cause disgrace and dishonor on his dad by not going to the party. So the big party is going on. Everyone's sitting at the table, and there's one seat open, and that's the seat of honor for the older brother. Where is he? Everyone's wondering, where is he? And then they hear, "I think he's outside. He won't come in." It's basically his way of declaring that I don't agree with my dad's decision. It's a vote of no confidence on this move. I don't want to be part of what dad's doing. And so dad has to get up and go outside. And everyone's going, "Oh my gosh, dad's going to go get him." It's a sign of disgrace in that culture that the father had to go out and plead with his son to come into dinner where he should have been. Why is the brother so mad? I mean, I joke maybe there's some emotional reasons in there, but I think one of the biggest things that we might miss because of our maybe misunderstanding or lack of knowledge about ancient Near East culture, especially around inheritance, is that there's a financial reason that is implied here. And so I always feel like this is best seen in a visual illustration. And so imagine, if you will, that this represents the father's wealth, okay? And that each of these are kind of the gold coins. You know, if you know that they actually stored wealth in the ancient Near East in mylar balloons, and with little. So the father, imagine that the father goes to the bank and he basically says, "So how much is all of my life worth?" Okay, and they kind of tally it all up, and they say, "Well, if you want to cash out on everything, here it is." And so I think I've got kind of 9 pouches of valuable gold coins here, and so in the ancient Near East, if there were just 2 boys, it's not a 50-50 split like it might be today. You remember the older son gets the double portion, or the double blessing it's referred to often. So that basically means that for every 1 bag of coins that the younger brother wants to cash out on, the older brother is going to get 2. So the younger brother gets 1, the older brother gets 2. The younger brother gets 1, the older brother gets 2. The older brother doesn't want his money right now. He's perfectly fine waiting for his father to pass. He wants a relationship, so that money goes back in the bank. The younger brother takes 33% of the family inheritance and just throws it away in a foreign country. But then he comes home one day, and what the father does through all of those beautiful images of the ring and the cloak and the party and calling him my son is that he invites him back into the family. And so a son in the family has a right to the inheritance. So one day that means the father's going to die, and guess what? Now this money is going to get split up again. And the younger son's going to get 1, and the older son will get 2, and the younger son will get 1, and the older son will get 2. Now here's where the math comes in. If we started with 9 pouches, the older son's inheritance should have been 66% of that, or 6 pouches, right? Look how many pouches he ends up with in the end. 1, 2, 3, 4. It's 45%. His younger brother gets more money than him. His younger brother got these 2 plus the 3 he threw away. That's 5 of 9. It's 55%. Sometimes I do this on a whiteboard, and the calculations are incredible. They're amazing, okay? But gold mylar is what I went with today. He's mad because, pardon my language, he's getting screwed here. You're telling me that my punk little brother who wasted all that money, he now gets my money? I have to pay for his foolishness? The bottom line is the older brother knows the only way this boy gets back in this family is if I am part of making him right financially. And that is not something he wants to do. It's only at the older brother's expense that the younger brother can be brought back in. It's going to cost the older brother something. In fact, in the end, his younger brother, the punk, is going to get more of the inheritance than he ever got. But here's the beauty of that. Now that you see that he doesn't want that to happen, now you begin to realize, these 2 boys are actually a lot more similar than we think. I mean, the younger brother wanted the money more than a relationship with his father. The older brother wants the money more than a relationship with his brother. They both want what they can get from another person rather than being in a right relationship with them. And so now you begin to see what is really kind of going on here. And it wasn't until I read Tim Keller's incredible book called Prodigal God, where he breaks this down in such a beautiful way, that he was the first person I ever heard who calls this the story of the 2 lost sons. And I remember going, wait a minute, 2 sons, both lost 100%. Now the progression fits. We go 1%, 10%. They're both lost. 100% of the boys are lost. And so now Jesus is like tying this all in beautifully. And to understand Jesus' parables, right? These are stories about make-believe people that don't really exist, but they're stories that are meant to relate to real life. You're always supposed to ask, who am I in this story, right? Who am I and who's God? God's usually the main character in the story. God's the father, clearly. But then who am I in the story? And so the sinners and tax collectors are naturally kind of the younger sons who we think of as being unkosher, unclean, hitting rock bottom, shameful, and disgraceful. But Jesus is making this scathing critique of the Pharisees and scribes by basically claiming you're the older brother and you're lost too. You're just as lost as the people you look down upon. Both sons are lost, just like both groups in the audience in front of Jesus are lost. But the irony is that only one group knows it. The sinners and tax collectors know they're lost. They're wandering home to me. You, on the other hand, are pulling back from me and won't recognize that you're lost. It's an incredible picture of kind of the reality that we live in even today, which is that in the entire world, Jesus is making the point that we are all lost. 100% of humanity is lost. We are all inherently separated. We're all inherently alienated from the Creator God who made us. The story just represents the 2 ways that we tend to get lost in life. Some of us tend to get lost like the younger brother, where we go out into this pattern of destructive self-centeredness. Right? Where we go on a journey of self-discovery. We imagine that the world has something out there that will make us happy that we don't have in here. And so we go out and we trade everything we have for it. And then ultimately we find out it doesn't satisfy. It's a lie. There's always a famine in that land. There's always a famine in the land of self-discovery and self-centeredness because we were not made to worship ourselves. There's no nourishment there ultimately. You'll always burn through whatever joy or nourishment you find. And so that's one way you can be lost. You can be lost by breaking all of God's rules, so to speak, in a journey of self-discovery. But some of us have a tendency to be lost maybe the other way, more of the form of the older brother, where we're wired towards kind of more of a prideful moralism, where we assume that life is about performance and perfection and doing the right thing to earn God's favor. And if I just, dot every I and cross every T and follow every law, and if I'm just a good enough person, then God will love me. And yet one day I wake up and I realize that none of this is being motivated from a good place. It's ultimately an anxious, fearful, did I do enough? Am I perfect enough? Am I ever going to measure up enough? And ultimately, it becomes kind of a joyless, fear-based compliance, living under the sense of pressure and never really happy or content. And as older brothers, we can find ourselves realizing that it's not the relationship with God the Father that we were ever looking for. It was a fear that we would lose out on the things that He has that we really want. I mean, the older son misses out on the relationship with the Father by thinking the goal is keeping all the do's and don'ts. If I abide by the law, then I'll be righteous and God will love me. But the essence of Christianity is not about abiding by the law. It's about being in an abiding relationship with the Father through Jesus Christ. And so you can get lost by doing all the wrong things, but you can equally be lost by doing all the right things for the wrong reasons. And that spectrum ends up encompassing 100% of the community around Jesus. And I would say even in a town like Burbank, there are probably people today who are religiously lost and irreligiously lost. And it takes some discernment sometimes to kind of figure out which one they are. The older brother has such a hard time forgiving his younger brother because he sees himself as better than him, superior than him. I did all the right things. You made all the mistakes. And here's the thing, it's impossible to forgive someone if you feel superior to him or her. It's impossible to forgive someone if you feel superior to him or her. That truth may just be from me this week, because I'm wrestling with some unforgiveness. And as I wrote that this week, I realized, I think I'm better than them. That's why I can't forgive them, because I don't have compassion, I have contempt. I got a little older brother going on right there. Ironically, as we said, two lost brothers, only one of them knew they were lost, and that's kind of the ironic paradox of the Pharisees. If you would just admit you were lost, then you could be found, because I'm looking for you, Jesus has said. I'm looking for you. It's so rich. It's such a rich text. We got to move on because there's families here, and y'all have wonderful lunch plans, I'm sure, so we'll get you out of here, but can I just close with a few application points? The first is this: whichever way you tend to get lost in life, Jesus still loves you and paid the price to bring you back home. I mean, if you're more like the younger brother who tends to rebel and wander into places you don't belong, then take heart, because Jesus himself left his Father's presence. He left his Father's house in heaven, so to speak, to come into this broken world that was experiencing a spiritual famine. And he ultimately came in and paid the price so that you could be restored home. He went searching for you in that pigsty that you were living in. And he wants to pick you up and rescue you and bring you home and put a robe on you. But if you're more like the older brother who doesn't have that story, you don't have that testimony of grace, of wandering off. Maybe you've been kind of in the church your whole life, but recognizing that you can be in the house and not have the heart of the Father, and you still at times find yourself lost in this story, then remember that it's never by your perfect performance that God the Father receives you. That Jesus was willing to take on the disgrace of leaving the house to go outside and engage with that older brother. Jesus went outside. He was literally crucified outside of the city gates alongside the criminals, bearing the shame that we should ultimately bear so that we could be welcomed back into his house and receive that honor. You'll never be perfect enough. You'll never do enough. You'll never earn enough. And ultimately, all that will do in you is create this cold, self-righteous exhaustion that will keep you from knowing the heart of God. Either way, God paid the price on the cross for you to be restored back home. The second application is, again, if lost people matter to God, then they must matter to God's people. There is an invitation and an obligation here to view lost people the way God views lost people. Do you know the third story, it broke the pattern. There was no search, but there could have been a search. Who was it in the story that should have searched? It's the older brother. The older brother should have gone out looking for his lost younger brother. And how do I know that? Because in the meta-narrative of creation, Jesus Christ is our older brother. He is the, quote, firstborn of all creation. And we are the younger brothers who are lost in our waywardness. And Jesus goes on a search. He enters out and he goes in the world going, where are you? I'm here to find you and I'm here to bring you home. Jesus becomes the older brother who goes on the search. So what he's really doing is critiquing the Pharisees and saying, if you really knew the heart of God, you would be searching for the people who are lost instead of trying to stay away from them. Why are you over there? Join me in hunting after them and trying to find them, and then we can all celebrate and throw a party together. Jesus summarizes his own mission in Luke 19 by saying, I came to seek and save the lost, and I'm willing to pay the price to do that, even if it's out of my inheritance. So the question then becomes for us, do lost people matter to you or just lost things? We know you care about lost things. Do lost people matter? Are we willing to pay the price? And then the final application, just maybe a question for us to reflect upon that I think is so true in just our cultural moment of the church in America right now. When the lost of our modern society encounter you on their journey to find God, do they experience you as the father or as the older brother? Do you ever think about how this story would have been different if on that day when the younger brother is walking home and he's rehearsing his speech, Father, I forgive, just a slave. I just want to be a slave, Dad. I mean, a servant, please. I don't know. He's rehearsing it. He's nervous. He's anxious. This is never going to work. I don't belong here. And what if that day on the field, at the furthest edge of the grain, the person that saw him first was the older brother? I think that would have been a different ending. What are you doing here? You don't belong here. No. What, did you run out of money? Uh-huh. Yeah. Would you waste it all? You're a waste. Get out of here. Dad doesn't want to talk to you. No, we haven't mentioned your name once since you left. Go. Be on your way. You don't belong. You're not part of this family. And the thing is, you know what that younger brother would have thought? You're absolutely right. I'm out. That's exactly what he thinks. That's why he's coming home, just to be a servant. That's the message in his head anyway. Listen to me. There are so many lost younger brothers in life right now who are wandering the streets, wondering if God could ever love them. And they're so confused about the areas of their life that don't seem to make sense. And they're confused about their sexuality or their gender or their life choices or what's next or if there is a God. And they know they don't live up and they know they've screwed things up and they don't know what to do. And then they just bump into someone who they think belongs in the house of God. And way too often, they are bumping into older brother Christians. Cold, judgmental, self-righteous, finger-pointing, condemning. And our job is to reveal the heart of the Father who would hike up his clothes and run. You want to come home? I've prayed every day you'd come home. Come, we've got a party ready just for you. There are younger sons just finding the courage to express that they might want to come home. I pray that they would experience us, not as older brothers, but as representing the heart of God the Father, who would always welcome them in. It's our tradition at Media City, as I've learned in the last couple months, to kind of finish our time in God's Word by just pausing for some moments of reflection. I like to think of it as just leaving space for God to do some business with you one-on-one. And so why don't we just pause now, and maybe some of these questions or some of these thoughts the Spirit might prompt as ways that we can engage and embody His love and message this week.